When I was young, I was hesitating to have children because I read many stories when parents were poor or had some like indecent job or something. Their children had problem accepting them. I had a lot of fear of that because I love children. So if my children did this to me, I would hurt very much. So this is why I had a lot of fear having children. But then I remember when my son was in the 5th grade, he asked me to get on a field trip with him. I hesitated a little bit at the beginning, thinking it would be difficult for me to manage because I'm using a wheelchair. But he said it's okay because it was his birthday. He wanted me to go on this trip with him. So then I waited outside his school when he came out with his classmates. He introduced me to his classmates saying, "This is my mom. She's using a wheelchair because he had polio when she was a child. I think her wheelchair is very cool." So I remember that a lot because it comforted me a great deal to know that I'm really accepted by my son and also by my daughter. They were not ashamed of me because of my disability. So this is part of the healing God gave me for my disability.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Overtones podcast. I'm Joe and I'm here today with my co-host, LaRae.
Hello there. Our goal on the Overtones podcast is to investigate and celebrate the diverse unity of the Christian church around the world. We speak to academics, church workers, and lay people from across the global church in order to highlight lesser-heard voices and grow in love for our brothers and sisters around the world.
The story you just heard was from our guest for today, Xie Dawei, who graciously agreed to sit down for an interview with our co-host Christy. In the rest of the episode, we get to listen in as Dawei shares her story of life as a polio survivor, a Chinese expat living in Philadelphia, and since graduate school, a follower of Jesus Christ.
We have found Xie Dawei's story to be so inspiring and uplifting, and we're confident that you will too. Enjoy!
Thank you, Dawei, for a beautiful story you just told us. The transformation of your heart through that experience with your son, and how you were able to feel that this is comfort brought about by God himself, and he was able to provide that spiritual recovery to you and help you overcome the fears that you used to have. Can we start with your self-introduction? Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I've given a lot of thought to how I define myself and what's more important to me. First, I think my identity should be I'm a Christian. I'm also a wife to my husband and a mom to my 2 kids. For work, I'm an associate professor of biostatistics at the University of Pennsylvania. My family and I live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, here in the United States.
How old are your kids now?
My son is 18. My daughter is 16.
And you sort of briefly touched on your disability. Can you tell us a little bit about it? We know that you contracted polio when you were young. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how that made you feel?
Yeah. Actually, some people thought like polio was a disease that you were born with,
Oh, okay.
They didn't know it was a virus.
Right.
It was actually just a virus, like a flu virus. Yeah, I contracted polio when I was just 8 months old. That was in 1971. I was born in 1970. Because later I'm going to talk about environment, the policy in China, so it's good to put it in the context.
Yeah.
At that time, we were living in a small village in Anhui province, China, where my dad was from. There was a polio outbreak in that village, and I caught the virus. My mom told me that I could crawl before I got sick, but after contracting polio and running a high fever, I couldn't crawl anymore. So my mom hated that village so much after that, and she refused to ever go back once we left.
And you're not in a Christian family as far as I know.
No, actually, none of my family were Christian then. Actually, before I came to the United States, I never met any Christian.
And you have never heard the gospel before you came to the United States?
Never.
I see. I guess, how did that make you feel as someone with disability then, not being a Christian? The family that you got.
I grew up in a very loving and supportive family. I think my parents did everything they could to protect me and help me live as normal a life as possible. For example, my daddy was especially dedicated. He would ride his bicycle to take me to school and pick me up every day. It was like 10 to 15 minutes ride each way. And he made 4 trips daily because of the lunch break. So he did this for nearly 10 years, even in the rain or snow, because as he told my mom, I want to give her what other kids have. So if the other kids can go to school in rainy days or snowy days, he wanted to do the same for me.
Because it would be hard for you to do that yourself, given the fact that you have problems walking normally.
Exactly. And also, I think some parents told my parents that I should, be more independent.
Okay.
And to exercise more or walk to school myself and walk back. But then I had some bitter memories. So, for example, when I was walking, some people stared at me. Or even there are kids mocking me, like imitating the way I walk. So that hurt me a lot.
I see.
So then to protect me, my parents, like my daddies, decided to ride a bicycle to go to school or pick me up. So then I could avoid this kind of humiliation.
Yeah.
So I remember, for example, it happened a lot. Like when I was walking, a person just stared at me because the way I walk. A lot of people were just curious. They didn't mean harm. But I was so angry because it made me feel bad. So one strategy I developed is like to stare back until they look away. I'll stare at their eyes, like straight in their eyes, and
Okay.
So even now, I can still feel the anger. I know I had a lot of happy times too, but the memories of that kind, like people mocking me, stand out the most are those difficult moments.
And you mentioned that anger was the sort of dominant emotion you feel, that you can still remember now. You can still sort of feel it now.
I deal with it, like after I became a Christian. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah, sure.
So this is my family. They're not Christian, but they did their best to support me. But at the same time, they didn't know how to look at my disability.
How did they look at your disability?
I think they wanted to give as much love as they can, but the whole country was, in terms of disability awareness and the social welfare in China, I wasn't aware of much growing up.
There wasn't any sort of resources that you were aware of when you grew up?
I think at that time, I thought, as a disabled person, you have to live, without any accommodation. That's normal. I never knew that you should receive some accommodation. Well, I wouldn't say should because, after I came to the United States, accommodations are already there because of the affirmative action. But, after I came to the United States, I realized, people can provide accommodation to disabled people.
Right.
In China, I never know about this.
Accommodation as in sort of resources for you to make sure that you have the same access to things as other people.
Right.
I see.
Yeah, I think in China, for example, jobs for people with disability were almost non-exist. Yeah, for example, in my high school, everybody is going to college. And at that time, like the only way to have a chance at a decent life was to go to college. But at my time, many public colleges have restrictions on admitting students with certain health conditions. For example, if you have hepatitis, even now, you will have difficulties getting some job. So growing up, I knew it's difficult for me to go to college, and it gave my parents a lot of stress. My parents later told me when I was in my last year in high school, there are a lot of sleepless nights for them. And they were sitting on the bed, looking at each other, crying, just.
Because they didn't think that you can get into college.
Right, and they didn't know what I can do. Because it's getting any job, like if you cannot go to college, getting any job would be almost impossible. But then, like, I was fortunate that the policies were starting to change during my time.
Okay.
So then I scored very high on the national college entrance exam. And then that led to an interview with one of the top universities. So during the interview, I was asked to walk in front of the interviewer. So he could confirm that I could manage the college life without accommodations.
Wow.
I mean, at that time, I thought I was lucky because,
right.
Like a lot
You're
of
like
times.
grateful for that.
Right. And then after I came to the United States, I told this story to my colleagues, and they were very surprised. They were like, wow, that's discrimination. But I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Right. You were not aware that the environment was so hostile, in a sense.
At that time, people told me, and my parents told me, you are lucky enough to be admitted.
Right. Okay.
Just
try to fit in as much as possible.
Exactly.
Don't complain.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Well, it was very challenging then.
I think at that time, your mindset is, discrimination, or you even don't call it discrimination. It's,
right.
You think that's normal.
Wow.
So after graduation, finding a job, it's just as hard because being a woman and disabled made me doubly discriminated.
Right.
It was very challenging.
It is. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, lots of these things I think are very much unfamiliar territory for a lot of our listeners. So thank you so much for sharing your experience. I wonder whether we dig a little bit deeper into how you managed that environment with disability before you were a Christian. Like, how did that make you feel about humanity, about society, about yourself as a disabled person? And did what you thought you knew influence your attitudes towards Christianity when you first heard about the gospel?
As a disabled person, my view of humanity is mixed. So on one hand, I received a lot of help from people along the way. They were kind and went out of their way to support me, but my feelings about it was complicated. So you would think I would be very grateful, but I was not. I often felt ashamed for needing help, and I didn't feel grateful. So instead, it was like a bittersweet. So looking back now as a Christian, I wish I had been more thankful to those who helped me. So at the same time, I also faced the discrimination and have many bitter memories of being judged or excluded. And some of them are like stuck to my memory for very, very long. And over time, I realized I also judge people a lot and struggle with being grateful. So when I was a PhD student at University of Michigan, I had a moment of clarity. I felt deeply aware of how much I complained, judged others, and lacked gratitude. So then I started to feel disgusted with myself suddenly, which led me to go to church. So when I went to church, admitting I was a sinner wasn't difficult at all because I felt so broken inside. So very soon after I started attending church, I became a believer. So I probably went to church like in the fall of 2002. And then I think in January 2003, I prayed the prayer to accept Jesus as my savior. And then got baptized on Easter that year. So my experience with humanity, both the good and the bad, prepared my heart to recognize my need for salvation.
Right. Wow. You mentioned sort of how your view of humanity was mixed. Like there were good things that happened, there are good people who sort of help you out, but there are also really, really hard times when people discriminated against you. Then you had this realization that, you yourself needed help, and you were cynical of other people, but also kind of about life and everything, and you wanted that change. What do you think what's the appeal of the gospel? And as someone with disabilities, with polio, what do you think is God's purpose in all of this?
Now I think about it, I think it was difficult for me to accept that I was weak.
Mm-hmm.
I think before I became a Christian, I was fighting my destiny.
Mm.
I was not satisfied, or, I didn't want to be a disabled, like in other people's eyes, disabled person. So I was like anti-authority a little bit, like rebellion. For example, when I first came to the United States as a graduate student, I joined an English Bible study to practice my language skills and learn more about Christianity, since, this country is known as a Christian country. Then one of the first stories we studied were from like Genesis 22, where God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. You know how difficult it is, right? For a non-believer to understand that story.
Yes.
I was very offended by it because, God was portrayed as this authoritative figure. He can ask Abraham to do this kind of thing. I was very offended by it. And I refused to step into church for many years after that. And then, it came to my fourth year of my PhD. I suddenly realized I wasn't a good person. I was not grateful. So I believe it was God working in me through the Holy Spirit, changing my heart and helping me to see my need for Him. And then this is why I decided to embrace the gospel. And it completely changed how I see myself and my disability. I would say, the biggest change was in my identity. I didn't know how to look at myself. My disability always bothered me. Before I became a Christian, I was, torn between two extremes. On one hand, I was proudful about my achievements because I went to the top university.
Yes.
Was a PhD student in the University of Michigan. I was proud of that. But then at the same time, I was ashamed of my body and my appearance. So I tied my worth to what I accomplished. So that shame I felt, I couldn't help by dealing with my identity problem.
Okay.
Because I feel like on the dating market or the marriage market, I was the lowest class.
That's how you feel.
Right. And at that time, for example, I saw a lot of disabled person marrying disabled person. Why? Because the abled person didn't want to marry the disabled person.
I see.
Yeah. So I think growing up, when you have this need of dating, you feel like, you are on that kind of scale, the lowest. Yeah. So then that kind of for example, if you like somebody, you had a crush on somebody, then you are so ashamed of yourself because you thought you are not worthy. That kind of feeling, it lasted for so many years. It had a very big impact on me, on my identity.
I see. And it sounds like as a Christian in an ongoing struggle, how has that been for you? I mean, as someone who knows the gospel, what changed and what remained to be something that you need to wrestle with?
I think, the change came slowly because, for example, before I became a Christian, I lived in this world for almost 33 years. And the experience in those 33 years were having a lot of impact on me. And it took just maybe as long to get over that kind of bad experience. So I think the first step is to find the Bible truth about my identity. So I give that a lot of thought, and I'll also share with people my thinking. First, I'm a Christian, which means I see myself as a creature created by God. God, because He's the creator. He's my Lord. He is the authority, the figure, that I tried to rebel against before. But now as a Christian, I totally admit that He is my Lord. He has authority on me. And this realization had completely changed how I view myself. So for example, as a creature, I know I'm dependent. And also, I'm not a perfect creature. I'm an imperfect creature. I'm a sinner. So as a creature, everything good, my talents, abilities, or even my family are gifts from God. It's not like I deserve all of this. So there is no reason to boast. But at the same time, I'm imperfect. I'm a sinner. That humbled me a lot. But then at the same time, I'm a child of God. And Jesus died on the cross and bought me with His precious blood. So, how much that love is. I know I'm deeply loved and valuable. So then, to know my identity is to admit I'm a creature, God is the creator, and also to understand I'm both unworthy and worthy. I'm unworthy because I'm falling short of God's glory, but worthy because Jesus died for me. So then this had helped me to see my disability in a new perspective. It's no longer something that defines me, because before I feel like polio defined who I am or who I was. But now I think polio doesn't define me anymore. To me, it's just a virus. There is nothing, shameful about contracting a virus. And my true identity is in Christ. I'm a Christian. This is the most important identity. So theoretically, it's clear to me. But now I think when you try to apply to your life, the impact from the past was still very deep in my heart. So for example, my brain knows I'm valuable. But in my heart, I still feel like sometimes I'm not worthy because of my disability. I still feel shameful when I walk before people in the way I walk. But that had to change little by little.
Yeah.
So after you became a Christian, your value or worldview had to change. And that will happen little by little. It will not happen overnight. The same here for my identity.
Right. And you touched on something absolutely beautiful here. These sort of tensions are something that are universal. I think we all feel it, despite the fact that we all have different limitations and different weaknesses. And not all of us are disabled in the traditional sense. But we are all sort of on the way in this kind of process of sanctification, being reminded of God's redeeming love for us, despite the fact that we are utterly unworthy. Thank you, Dawei, for that very beautiful, honest picture of Christian life. And since you mentioned your experience as a Christian and how that sort of slowly changed the way you look at yourself, I thought it was great that you mentioned it was God being the one who provides not just earthly needs, but very much someone who provides for you spiritually and helps you change the way you look at yourself. And I wonder whether we can just sort of explore that a little bit. How do you think polio plays a part in your knowledge of God and in your current relationship with God?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, my disability and struggles, and the struggles it brought forced me to think deeply about my identity. Through this journey, I came to understand just how loving and merciful God is. For example, I can share my struggle publicly, and I shared this at my church, and I was so well accepted. I think, when I became a Christian, I struggled a lot, about this sin, and I was so shameful. I didn't want people to know. But then I think the gospel gave me the courage to share this with people, because this is the real struggle of a Christian. And then this wisdom from the Bible completely resolved my identity crisis. I think to me, truth brings me joy. So knowing this makes me want to praise and worship Him with everything I have. Even singing and dancing before Him And I can't dance because of my disability, but I think I can dance in heaven. So I look forward to that day. So I feel God is incredibly personal to me because throughout my search for answers about who I am, I could sense that he was guiding me every step of the way. So when I finally found the answer, it was so beautiful. It filled me with joy. I can't even fully describe. This is what 1 Peter 1:8 calls inexpressible and glorious joy.
Beautiful, isn't it? Like what the verse describes, the joy we have as Christians, inexpressible and glorious. You also mentioned that hope you have in Christ.
Yeah.
That love that you already have, but at the same time, you're looking forward to see how you will be perfected. As Revelation says very clearly, our souls will be perfected as saints. And we look forward to the day, not just that we will be renewed, but physically we will be restored and renewed as well. And that's certainly the hope that you have and that we all, Christians, we all have. Now we have covered your relationship with God as a Christian and how you look at yourself. And that also fills me with joy as I listen to your testimony. And I wonder whether that also changed the way you look at other people, how you relate to other people.
Yeah. I think because of my experience, I have some special compassion for those who are marginalized. I think narrowly speaking, people can be marginalized because of their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, nationality, age, religion, disability, and sexual identity and sexual orientation. But more broadly, I think everyone is marginalized in some way because we are all different and the others may not understand our struggles. So everyone has unique challenges and special needs. So I felt marginalized myself in the past. So before I thought I was marginalized because of my disability, but now I think it could be marginalized for anything. But now I think because I'm known by God and I know who I am, I'm a Christian. So I don't feel marginalized anymore.
Beautifully put. I wonder whether you think growing up in China and having polio also helped you share the gospel amongst Chinese people in a distinctive way. Because I know that you're now going to a Chinese community and serving Chinese church in Philadelphia. And do you think that sort of helps you?
I think it does. I think we all struggle with self-identity issues. So one of the consequences of sin is the broken relationship between us and ourselves, which creates this identity crisis. I've found that this can be a very great starting point for discussing the gospel. So if you don't know who you are, you either overestimate yourself or underestimate yourself. You can't see yourself clearly.
Right.
So in Philadelphia, I've met many Chinese students and scholars who take great pride in their academic achievements.
Right.
But no matter how accomplished they are, even like, for example, they said high achieved people had imposter syndrome.
Right. We see that a lot in Oxford as well.
Yeah. Identity is a constant struggle if you base it on your success or performance. As I said before, my experience has shown me that the true identity can only be found in God. Because God is our creator. He can define who we are. Whenever I share for example, I said, do you know how I struggle with identity issues? I would point to them two facts. One, I have a very successful career as a professor at University of Pennsylvania. But then at the same time, I'm disabled. How I reconcile these two aspects of my life.
Yep.
And then it got people very interested.
I see.
So this understanding helps me connect with others and share the gospel in a way that resonates with their struggles.
That's so true. Because I think you're right that we all sort of in some way struggle with self-esteem. That we all want people to like us. We all want people to admire us. But at the same time, we know who we are. And we are massively aware of our weaknesses and our disadvantages as well. It's impossible, isn't it, to feel like you are
worthy.
Yeah, and to be just perfectly confident about yourself. And we all in some way feel that kind of insecurity inside of us. And I think what you said is beautiful because you had that experience growing up and it was such an intense struggle, but that struggle helped you to relate to other people when they also struggle with confidence and self-esteem, and you point them to the person who's the perfect love. Christ offers that redeeming love and acceptance that we all desire.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Like, we don't really see or notice a lot of people with disability at church. We very often neglect the marginalized in whatever form or ways people are marginalized. They tend to be ignored in social settings, even at church. And what do you think we could do as the church to love people with disability better, to do better in including them?
I think this is a very interesting question. Actually, it didn't occur to me that I didn't give it much thought how a church can do better to love people with disability. Because now I think a disability is not, it seems like in the United States it's already resolved by affirmative action, And then, like now the marginalized are defined as, for example, the more controversial sexual orientation or sexual identity issues. I think those are hot topic in church, like how to care for those people.
Yes, right. Not so much disability, but sort of sexual minorities at church.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, because when I think about it at my church, because all of the church members are immigrants from China, I'm the only disabled person among the first generation Chinese immigrants in my church. There is a reason for that. As I mentioned, it's been historically difficult for people with disability to access proper education, let alone study abroad.
Right.
So I'm fortunate that I haven't faced any discrimination while serving in the church. But now, however, we have children with special needs and other members experiencing disability as they age. So while the church is still working hard to create a loving environment for them, I would say care for disabled person was not one of the main focuses in my church.
And why do you think that's the case, given the fact that there are people who are struggling with disability?
Right. So this is why, your question make me thinking that we should be more aware of this, actually.
I see.
For example, one improvement that we can do is to provide more training on how to care for people with disabilities or special needs. I think that's something we can do. But then at the same time, there are many, I think disability is like visible, but then like other disability, like mental disease or other health issues or spiritual struggles, those were not so visible. So you have to know that person to understand their struggles. So I think this is why I think, at church, we should foster an environment for transparency. This is why I so outspoken about my struggles, about my sins, about my disability. I wanted people to realize that sins and struggles are normal for a Christian. It's not like after you become a Christian, you don't have sin anymore. You don't need to struggle anymore. You still struggle, and struggling with sin is actually the process of being sanctified.
Mm-hmm.
So you want people to know the process of your change. It's not like you want to only present the end product, like a perfect Christian. I want people to be transparent about their struggles, about their sins.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is so hard for people to speak up about their struggles, either it is disability or their struggles with sin, especially sins that are largely frowned upon or denounced. It is so important for the church to be more open and for people to feel like they are comfortable enough with their church community to speak up. And we are all responsible to nurture that environment of love and acceptance so that people, especially I guess younger people, the younger generation, they're able to feel confident enough that even if I would share something that I consider a dark secret in my life, these adults or these friends of mine and church workers are going to love
Exactly.
despite these things that I share. And I guess from a secular perspective, we're now, as you mentioned, sexual orientation or sexuality is something that people talk about a lot. It's a controversial topic, both inside the church and outside the church. And I think we're at a pretty critical time, not just in the US, but I think in other places as well, when it comes to diversity and inclusivity. We just saw, I think not too long ago, President Trump puts all US government diversity staff on paid leave. And on the other hand, I think we know that diversity and inclusivity are ideologically loaded words, and they can sometimes be celebrated quite uncritically. And so I think there are two extremes that people are aware of, especially as Christians. Like, how do we sort of find that right balance and show the love of Christ, both at church and outside of the church? Do you think, being someone with disability and as a Christian, how should we look at diversity and inclusivity? And you also work at a university in Philadelphia. I guess that's also something that, educators care deeply about today. Do you have any thoughts on diversity and inclusivity?
This is a big topic.
It is.
It's not easy. As I said before, I have a special compassion for those who are marginalized, including the sexuality minority or, sexual orientation minority. I wanted to know them, to understand their struggle, not just to label them, a gay Christian or something. I don't want to do that because it can be so merciless just to label people, and you don't know their real struggles and their stories, their experiences. So I can understand, for every person, the issue is not easy. It's not a simple one. But I still think we need to look at everything through gospel. So, for example, my disability cannot define me. I don't think people should be defined by their sexuality or money or a job. For example, if you call this person, oh, this is a gay Christian, it's like the most important identity is in that, but that's not true. When you see me and describe me to other people, maybe you will be like, oh, she's disabled. It's very easy for you to identify her among the crowd. So then, am I a disabled Christian? No, I'm not. I'm just a Christian. So I think only God can define who we are. And the most important identity is your relationship with God. Whether you admit that you are a creature and He's the creator. Whether you admit He's your Lord and your Savior. I think that's the most important part. And if we try to define ourselves by anything else, we will always be left searching for and ultimately disappointed because those things cannot define us. And we need to look at everything through gospel, through Bible. So then we allow the truth to shape how we understand and prioritize these aspects of our lives. So I think that God is rich and He created each of us very differently. So I really appreciated that diversity. And also everyone was created in God's image. And we need to include and being inclusive. But at the same time, we need to look at everything through gospel. Whether, that's a sin, whether that's a biblical. Yeah, we need to correct our view of a lot of things by gospel. But it's difficult. Theoretically it's easy to say, but in reality it involves a lot of struggles. And then we need to care for each other. Again, I say we need to love each other deeply, to know their struggles and pray for them and walk alongside with them.
I completely agree. I think one thing you have mentioned multiple times is the kind of intimate knowledge of another person. Before labeling someone, it's important to get alongside them, really know the person deeply, and knowing, the struggles they have, the problems they have in their lives beyond what we think we see. And then we can talk about inclusivity, diversity. We can try to love them in a Christ-like way. I think another thing that you touched on, I really like that way, is identity. And that's such a It's such a buzzword today, I think. And it's easy to say, I think everyone can easily say that, of course we want diversity, of course we want to include other people. These are virtues that Christians should embrace them. While other people become quite sort of scared of or critical of is how these words become a way to define someone, and that becomes their worth, becomes their core identity. And I think that can be, as you said, enslaving instead of freeing. If we are to label people with these identities, they become something that we take pride in. But what if these are fluid concepts with fluid values, and you're always torn between, this is a really good thing, adds value to myself, and this other side, what if I lose this identity? What if this identity is no longer valuable in people's eyes? And what's constant and what's true is how God, as our creator and redeemer, look at us, and how we can rest in that identity that's never going to change. Thank you for pointing it out so beautifully for us and sharing such a personal story with us.
My pleasure.
Wow, Joe, what an incredible story of God's faithfulness through times of real sorrow and hardship. I don't know about you, but I just struggle so much to wrap my brain around the kinds of discrimination Dawei faced as a child and even as a university student. I think I at least can just really take for granted the kinds of progress that have been made, I guess at least in some cultures, to make higher education more inclusive and even just to teach children to be kinder to those who are different from themselves.
Yeah, I think I was also struck by those same things, but also that all these challenges, both the physical and the spiritual, how they're so connected, and how I guess sometimes our physical challenges always link with our spiritual challenges, and how they kind of lead on from each other, or one sparks another and the other sparks the other. And I guess what I found really memorable is that struggle with self-esteem and identity. We often look so much to our own selves to find security, or how we're doing, or who we are, as something to hold on to. But actually, that as Christians, we're able to look beyond that. We're able to look beyond the different scenarios that are facing us from day to day and look to something that doesn't change, God's unconditional, redeeming and transformative love for us.
Amen. What a wonderful truth to hold on to.
Well, thank you so much for listening in once again to our podcast. This episode concludes our mini-series looking at Christian perspectives on disability, but season 2 isn't quite over just yet.
That's right. Tune in again next week for another of our historical episodes. This time we'll be digging into the life of the ever-fascinating 18th century moralist Samuel Johnson. You might have heard of his Dictionary of the English Language, but did you know that he was also a Christian and had a lot to say about what faithful engagement looks like in the context of an increasingly secular culture?
Well, we look forward to sharing that conversation with you as well. So, bye for now.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning into the Overtones podcast today. Make sure to subscribe and tune in to the next episode on your streaming platform of choice.
Follow us and share our podcast with your friends on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us on both platforms as Overtones Think Tank.
And if you'd like to get in touch with feedback, comments, or other ideas, our email address is podcast@overtonesproject.com. See you next week.